Sweden has entered a new era. After more than 2 centuries of neutrality, Stockholm is now a full member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That political shift immediately transformed the way the country must think about defense, money, and national priorities. For decades, Sweden maintained a modest military posture, confident that diplomacy and geography provided safety. Now the calculus has changed. Russia's war in Ukraine, rising instability in the Baltic, and renewed competition in the Arctic have forced Sweden to spend heavily, raising its defense budget to more than 2.4% of gross domestic product in 2025. The question is whether one of Europe's most socially generous and fiscally disciplined countries can sustain that level of military ambition without compromising its economic foundations. Becoming a member of the alliance brings obligations. Sweden must align with NATO standards, integrate its command structures, and contribute to joint operations. That requires modern air defenses, capable naval forces, and mobile ground troops ready to reinforce the Baltic flank. NATO's benchmark for defense spending is 2% of gross domestic product, but Sweden has already committed to exceed that, targeting more than 2.4%. In practical terms, this means a defense budget approaching 145 billion Swedish krona, roughly 13 billion United States dollars, almost twice the amount allocated in 2020. For a country of only 10 million people, the scale of that investment is striking. The list of procurement programs reads like a who's who of modern European armament. Saab's Gripen E next-generation fighter remains the flagship of Swedish air power, with contracts expanding production to between 120 and 140 aircraft, valued at about 60 billion Swedish krona. The government has also purchased the Patriot PAC-3 MSE air defense system from Raytheon and Lockheed Martin for around $3.2 billion United States dollars, a landmark deal symbolizing Stockholm's new alignment with American defense technology. Beneath the sea, the Blekinge-class A-26 submarines represent the most sophisticated vessels ever built in Sweden, with the first 2 boats costing roughly 8 billion krona and negotiations underway for a third. On land, the Archer 2.0 self-propelled artillery system is being produced both for the Swedish Army and for export, while naval infrastructure on Gotland and around Stockholm is being upgraded at a cost exceeding $1.5 billion United States dollars. Taken together, these programs absorb more than 80% of all planned defense investment funds through 2028. How does Sweden intend to pay for this transformation? The economy is solid, with a gross domestic product of about 620 billion United States dollars and public debt hovering near 32% of output, one of the lowest ratios in Europe. Yet high social spending leaves little slack. The government has published a defense investment framework for 2024 to 2035 that earmarks 500 billion krona, equivalent to 46 billion United States dollars, for military modernization. The plan relies on several funding sources: a small increase in the value-added tax and fuel excise tax, a 2% reduction in municipal welfare transfers, and a significant role for the domestic defense industry in generating export revenue. In 2024, Saab's international orders rose 38%, and exports of Gripen fighters, radar systems, and Archer guns helped offset the cost of national procurement. The state is effectively betting that industrial growth and arms exports will recycle money back into the treasury. Still, fiscal pressure is building. Sweden's budget deficit widened by roughly 1.5% of gross domestic product in 2025, prompting the issuance of special defense bonds, the first since 1988. Defense inflation adds another layer of complexity. The cost of materials, electronics, and skilled labor has increased faster than consumer prices. Analysts warn that if economic growth slows or exports decline, Stockholm may have to borrow more or postpone projects. The public debate is intense. Sweden's welfare model depends on extensive state support for healthcare, education, and housing. Many citizens worry that every billion krona devoted to new submarines means fewer nurses, teachers, or social workers. For the first time in decades, defense spending has become a divisive domestic issue rather than a consensus policy. The government counters that these investments are not mere expenses, but engines of economic and technological growth. The Swedish defense sector, anchored by Saab, BAE Hägglunds, and NATO, employs tens of thousands and drives research in advanced materials, robotics, and artificial intelligence. Defense procurement is therefore being framed as industrial policy with security benefits. By expanding production capacity and export capability, Stockholm hopes that each krona spent on weapons will eventually return through taxes, wages, and foreign sales. In parallel, Sweden is aligning its supply chains with European partners to reduce dependency on Chinese components and rare earth minerals, which are critical for avionics and propulsion systems. This emphasis on technological sovereignty mirrors wider European efforts to insulate defense industries from geopolitical risk. Yet even with these justifications, questions remain about long-term sustainability. Unlike Norway, Sweden lacks a sovereign wealth fund built on oil revenue. Its fiscal strength rests on steady taxation and disciplined budgeting. A future downturn, demographic shifts, or another pandemic could quickly tighten the margins. Moreover, the cost of maintaining high-tech systems, spare parts, software updates, and training often exceeds the initial purchase price. Defense economists estimate that sustaining the current level of capability could require annual expenditures approaching 15 billion United States dollars by the early 1930s, a figure that may test even Sweden's efficient bureaucracy. Comparison with neighboring countries provides perspective. Norway can finance its naval expansion from petroleum income, while Denmark benefits from American logistical support in its Arctic posture. Sweden, by contrast, must rely primarily on its own taxpayers and export revenue. In that sense, it resembles Australia. Both are middle powers seeking strategic autonomy through domestic industry rather than pure alliance dependence. Sweden's defense investment framework is conceptually similar to the technology component of the AUKUS Pillar 2 initiative, focusing on artificial intelligence, unmanned systems, and resilient supply networks. In the near term, Sweden appears capable of meeting its obligations. The fiscal balance remains healthy, the industry is competitive, and public support for NATO membership is still strong, especially after Russia's continued aggression in Ukraine. But over time, the balance between welfare and warfare will define Sweden's political identity. The country that built its reputation on neutrality, pragmatism, and social equality is now discovering the costs of collective defense. The shift is not only about weapons, it is about redefining what national security means in an era when economic resilience and military power are inseparable. Sweden's big spender moment is therefore both a test and an opportunity. If the government can integrate industrial policy, fiscal prudence, and alliance commitments, it may prove that small, high-tech democracies can sustain credible defenses without undermining prosperity. If not, Stockholm risks trading its fiscal calm for strategic overreach. For now, the Gripens still fly, the submarines are under construction, and the bills are being paid. Whether that remains true a decade from now will determine whether Sweden's leap into NATO's front line was an act of vision or a very expensive act of faith.